Imagine building the perfect snowman, only to watch your nightmare neighbor destroy it. Not once, not twice, but over and over again. That's how this all started. My favorite season had finally arrived. Winter. I've always loved the crisp air on my cheeks, the glow of holiday lights on every street corner, and the joyful sight of neighborhood kids playing in the snow. But most of all, I loved my tradition. Every December, I built a spectacular snowman in my front yard. I'm not talking about a simple stack of 3 snowballs with a corncob pipe. I mean a masterpiece. Each year, my snowman was different, bigger, and more creative. One year, I crafted a life-size snow wizard, complete with a frosty staff. Another year, I sculpted an 8-foot-tall snow dragon that wrapped around my mailbox. Neighbors snapped pictures for social media, kids giggled in delight, and for a while, it made our suburb feel like one big family. But as luck would have it, something was different this season. Or rather, someone. And that someone's name was Karen. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We post wild HOA dramas, jaw-dropping neighborhood stories, and more content that keeps you on the edge of your seat. So make sure you turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss our next crazy saga. If you've never crossed paths with an HOA Karen, let me fill you in. They thrive on rules nobody asked for, find new ways to bother you with absurd demands, and wave around authority that's usually made up in their own heads. They're the type to slam on your door at 9 a.m. because your fence is the wrong shade of beige, or because your lawn ornaments break the uniform look of the neighborhood. And yes, this can happen even if there is no official homeowners association. Karen had popped into our neighborhood the previous year, and she wasted no time making herself the self-appointed queen of everything. She posted printouts on telephone poles claiming all houses must comply with HOA standards, threatening fines for minor things like the color of your patio furniture. The funny part was, our community had voted against forming an HOA years ago. Nobody recognized Karen's claims, but she still marched around handing out official violations, as if she was a law unto herself. So, when I put up my annual snowman, this time wearing a charming top hat and a real scarf, I thought maybe I'd get a disapproving glance from Karen. But I never expected the madness that was about to unfold. I woke up early, excited to see how my newly built snowman was holding up under the chilly night air. With a warm mug of coffee in hand, I peeked out the window. Instead of admiring my snowman's proud posture, I saw a disturbing sight. My snowman's head was nowhere in sight. The snow torso was flattened into a messy heap. 2 stick arms were scattered across the yard. It looked less like a cheerful winter creation and more like a crime scene. My first thought was a group of kids messing around, but kids usually just knock it over in one swoop. This was different, deliberate and thorough. Curious, I headed back inside and pulled up my security camera feed, and there she was, Karen, in her fuzzy robe and slippers, waddling over to my yard at 11:46 p.m. She started with a swift kick that sent the snowman's head flying, then grabbed the arms and stomped the torso into a flat circle of ice and snow. As if that wasn't enough, she fished a hairdryer out of her robe pocket and began methodically melting the remains. I was dumbstruck. Who on earth brings a hairdryer outside in the freezing cold to finish off a snowman? Karen, apparently. Shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief, I rushed outside. No sign of Karen, but there was a piece of paper taped to my front door. Dear homeowner, as per the new HOA regulations, all unauthorized yard decorations must be removed within 24 hours. Failure to comply may result in fines. Signed, Karen, HOA President. HOA President? Our suburb had no official HOA. She had tried and failed to establish one, but nobody took her seriously, except for a few new residents who believed her fancy letters and ended up paying her dues. That's when I realized this was personal. She didn't like my snowman, so she declared it an unauthorized yard decoration. This had fake HOA written all over it. She wanted to scare me, to push me around until I bowed to her imaginary rules. But if she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. Later that day, after cooling off, both figuratively and literally, I decided to rebuild the snowman. No way was Karen getting the last laugh, so I piled up the snow again, made it even taller, and gave it a few extra touches just to show her I wasn't backing down. I also set my security cameras to capture every angle of the yard. If Karen showed up again, I would have crystal clear evidence. Sure enough, the next night, Karen returned, this time with a shovel. She took her sweet time hacking away at my snowman like she was on some twisted archaeological dig. There wasn't a single chunk left bigger than a golf ball by the time she was done. By morning, I found not just a destroyed snowman, but multiple bright orange notices taped to my front door, mailbox, and even my fence. Violation warning. You are in breach of HOA regulations regarding yard decorations. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and possible legal action. When I picked one up, I felt my blood boil. I could have ignored it, but Karen was known for scaring new neighbors into paying her fees. For them, these letters looked legitimate. She used legal-sounding language and official-looking stamps. I worried about the older folks who might not realize it was all fake. So that morning, I marched over to her house, arms loaded with the ridiculous violation notices. I rang her doorbell, half expecting her to hide, but she opened it immediately as though she was standing there waiting for me. She wore a smug grin, sipping coffee from a mug labeled HOA Queen. "I knew you'd show up," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I held out the papers. "You want to explain these?" Karen gave them a quick glance, shrugged, and said, "Those are legally binding notices. You have 24 hours to comply." I almost choked laughing. "Karen, we voted against an HOA. You're not a president, and these aren't legal." She waved a hand. "Disagree all you want, but you're violating the new aesthetic rules." It was like talking to a wall. I realized she had no intention of being reasonable. In her mind, she was the law. "Well, Karen," I said, "I hope you like the taste of crow because I'm not paying you a dime." I turned on my heel, storming away. She called after me, "We'll see about that." This woman was delusional, but she was also cunning. She knew that if she acted with enough confidence, some neighbors would just cave in. I refused to be one of them. That evening, I decided to elevate the battle to the next level. If Karen wanted to keep destroying my snowman, I would make one that even her fury couldn't topple. Off to the hardware store I went. I grabbed a steel drum, several bags of quick-dry cement, a handful of bricks, a sturdy metal pole. My plan? Build a snowman fortress. First, I filled the steel drum with a mix of water and cement and let it freeze overnight. Next, I placed that heavy core in the yard, surrounded it with ice-packed snow, and carved out a perfectly round shape. Then I set the bricks at the base for additional weight. Finally, I doused the exterior in water so it would form a slick layer of ice. From the street, it looked like any other cheerful, holiday-themed snowman. A carrot nose, coal eyes, an old scarf wrapped around its neck. But inside, it was a 300-pound block of frozen cement, anchored to the ground by a steel rod. I was sure if Karen tried to knock it over again, she was in for a rude awakening. I set up my cameras in prime positions, made some hot cocoa, and watched from my window, waiting. Around midnight, headlights swept across my living room. Karen's SUV crawled up the street. She stopped in front of my house, glaring at the larger-than-life snowman. For a moment, I thought she'd keep driving, but she pulled into my driveway, hopped out, and approached the snowman with a brand-new shovel. I held back a laugh. She angled the shovel and swung it like a medieval weapon. Clang! The sound echoed through the night, metal on metal. The shovel recoiled so hard that Karen nearly dropped it. She stared at the snowman, wide-eyed, probably trying to figure out why it felt like hitting solid rock. She leaned in, touching the snow's surface, her breath forming little clouds in the cold air. Then her eyes darted to my house. She probably realized she was being watched, or at least recorded. She took a step back, pulled out her phone, and made a call. Next thing I knew, she hopped into her SUV, reversed a few feet, and revved the engine. I suddenly realized her plan. She intended to ram the snowman. I felt a burst of adrenaline. Was she really going to do this? Yes, she was. She floored it. The SUV surged forward, slamming into the snowman. The front bumper buckled in an instant, the hood crumpled like a soda can, and steam hissed from the busted radiator. The snowman? It stood there, practically unscathed, a silent sentinel of justice. Karen stumbled out of her SUV, staring at the damage in shock. I stepped outside, sipping my hot chocolate for dramatic effect. "Something wrong?" I called out. She spun to face me. You booby-trapped your yard!" she yelled, her face twisted in fury. Before I could reply, flashing lights lit up the scene. 2 police cars pulled up, sirens cutting through the quiet night. Officers Jacobs and Miller stepped out, shining flashlights around. Their expressions were a mix of confusion and exasperation. Jacobs approached Karen, who was standing next to her totaled SUV. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" he asked. Karen, seizing her chance, launched into an all-too-familiar Karen routine. "He trapped me! He put concrete in his snowman to sabotage my car." Officer Miller looked at me, then back at the shattered SUV, then up at the untouched snowman. "You put concrete in a snowman?" I shrugged. "It's just a creative way to build it so it wouldn't collapse. I had no idea someone would try to ram it with their vehicle." Karen's face turned red. "He did it on purpose." Officer Jacobs pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, even if the snowman is reinforced, that doesn't excuse you driving onto his property and crashing into a stationary object." Karen sputtered, clearly grasping for an argument. "He was mocking the HOA rules. I'm the president. He's defying me." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Which HOA is this exactly?" Of course, Karen couldn't provide a valid answer. After some back and forth, the officers realized they had enough reason to write Karen up for reckless driving, property damage, and trespassing. Jacobs turned to me. "Would you like to press charges?" he asked. I considered it. But part of me felt that Karen was already going to face enormous bills for her SUV repairs. She also had a habit of pushing back harder whenever cornered. So I requested an official trespassing warning instead, letting her off easy, for now. The officers sighed and told Karen she'd need a tow truck for her SUV. She looked ready to explode, but with the cops there, she knew better than to lash out. "See you next winter, Karen," I said, patting my mighty snowman as I headed inside. She let out a frustrated scream as I closed the door behind me. I thought that would be the end of it. But Karen was just getting started. Less than 24 hours later, I found another letter taped to my door. Mandatory Community Reimbursement Notice. Due to damages sustained by the HOA President's vehicle while enforcing neighborhood standards, each homeowner must pay a fee of $300. I almost spit out my morning coffee. She wanted everyone to cover her repair costs. It was so absurd that I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My neighbor Vince got a similar notice. Another neighbor, Jill, showed me hers. It looked identical, just with a different date. Karen was apparently blanketing the entire street. At this point, everyone realized how unhinged she was. Neighbors started banding together, forming group chats and discussing how to handle Karen's nonsense. Some had stories of paying her HOA dues for months, not realizing it was fake. Word spread fast. One neighbor, Rosa, even found out that Karen had scammed an elderly couple down the street, collecting late fees for over a year. That's when we decided enough was enough. A small group of us, led by my friend Mike, a retired Army vet who took zero nonsense from anyone, decided to call the city. We reported Karen's suspicious activities, her phony HOA documents, and her attempts to extort money from the entire block. The city officials promised to look into it. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She posted official-looking signs on every street corner. HOA regulations will be enforced immediately, no exceptions. Some signs listed petty rules about lawn decorations, holiday lights, mailbox colors, you name it, she had a rule for it. She even tried to ban non-regulation garden gnomes from front lawns. Mike, being the bold soul he was, walked around one morning tearing down every sign he could find. Others followed suit, stuffing them into trash bags. Karen must have seen it from her window. She came storming down the sidewalk, shrieking that we were destroying official HOA property. We shrugged. "Fraudulent notices aren't official," Mike replied cheerfully, dropping another sign into the trash. She screamed something about lawsuits, but nobody listened. That afternoon, Karen tried a new tactic. She started emailing threats and new violation warnings to everyone in the neighborhood. Some of the older residents panicked, not knowing if this was real. So we had a block meeting, explaining how Karen had no real authority, and that the city was investigating her. Sure enough, the next day, we saw 2 police cruisers roll into the neighborhood again. This time we had no idea who called them. Maybe it was Karen. Maybe it was another neighbor complaining about her. All we knew was that soon enough the cops were talking with Karen on her front lawn. I walked outside casually to see if I could overhear. Mike joined me, as did a few other neighbors. We watched from a distance as Karen frantically pointed at her front door, waving papers around. We couldn't catch every word, but phrases like trespassing and harassment floated in the air. She seemed to be accusing us of these crimes. The officers looked tired, as if they'd been listening to her rant for too long. Then one of them motioned in our direction, probably asking her to calm down. She stamped her foot like a spoiled child. Eventually, the cops left without issuing any tickets to us. We later learned that Karen had called them, claiming we destroyed her official HOA signs. The cops apparently told her those signs weren't official at all. Karen was livid. That same night, another set of police calls. This time, it was a noise complaint. She claimed someone was blasting loud music. When the police arrived, they found the street almost silent. It became clear Karen was using any excuse to call the cops, hoping they'd punish us for ignoring her HOA rules. Luckily, the officers weren't buying her stories. They gave Karen a stern warning about misusing emergency services. A week later, city officials finally arrived, armed with a stack of complaints from multiple neighbors. They'd come to investigate Karen's fake HOA. She tried to show them bylaws and documents, but every page was riddled with nonsense. They discovered she'd been collecting unauthorized payments from unsuspecting residents for months, even forging signatures on HOA contracts. This was serious business. Fraud, forgery, possibly even tax evasion. Karen tried to argue her case, but the city officials had seen enough. They left with armfuls of her so-called HOA records, stating that they would be in touch. That very evening, we saw Karen pacing up and down her driveway, phone glued to her ear. Some neighbors guessed she might be on the line with a lawyer, or maybe chewing out whichever poor soul had gotten her into the idea of a fake HOA. I thought the situation might settle down after the city's visit, but Karen was too stubborn. She started patrolling the neighborhood daily, handing out new violation notices for ridiculous reasons. Holiday lights not in compliance with HOA color codes. Front door color not approved by the HOA Aesthetic Committee. Yard ornaments exceeding the standard height limit. One neighbor got a fine for having a doormat that clashed with the uniform appearance Karen wanted. Another was told to remove a wind chime because it was unauthorized auditory decor. It was laughable, but also stressful. Some of the more timid residents worried Karen might keep calling the police or taking them to small claims court. We reassured them that there was no legal backing, but tension still hung in the air. Finally, one cold morning, everything came crashing down, figuratively and literally. City officials returned, this time with 2 police vehicles for backup. Word spread fast, and soon half the neighborhood was peeking out windows or standing on sidewalks. Karen opened the door, took one look at the official badges, and tried to slam it shut. But the officers blocked it, presenting her with a warrant to search the premises for fraudulent HOA documents and financial records. Karen resisted at first, screaming about her rights, but the police had the law on their side. They entered her home. We all watched from outside as boxes of papers were carried out. It looked like Karen had meticulously documented every fake fine, every HOA due, and every imaginary regulation. One of the city officials approached her on the lawn. She read out a list of charges: fraud, forgery, filing false liens, and misrepresenting a legal homeowners association. Karen tried to protest, calling it all a misunderstanding. That's when the police officer stepped forward with handcuffs. "Karen," he said firmly, "you're under arrest." The crowd gasped. Some people clapped. I stood there, heart pounding. After all this chaos, it was finally happening. Karen was being held accountable. She blubbered and insisted it was all a mistake, but the officers weren't having it. They read her the Miranda rights, put her in the back of a squad car, and drove off. As she passed by my property, she caught sight of the indestructible Snowman still standing proud. I couldn't resist giving her a little wave. With Karen gone, the neighborhood felt like a weight had been lifted. No more random HOA fines, no more threatening letters, no more petty calls to the police. Some folks placed thank you notes on my door saying the Snowman saga had finally broken Karen's reign of terror. A few months later, I heard that Karen was found guilty of fraud and had to pay back every dime she extorted. I didn't see her again. She sold her house, or had it repossessed, depending on the rumor, and left town. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale, please hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Comment below with your city and share any Karen stories you have.